What is the difference between a Black American and an African American? The terms Black American and African American are not equivalent or interchangeable, although they are generally, but erroneously considered as such by whites and some native Blacks. Black Americans are born in America and are descendants of slaves. African American is a term most accurately applied to a person born in Africa that has relocated or migrated to America. In reality, each term is derived from totally different cultural, language, political, religious, and racial experiences too. Any group is a sum total of its unique experiences, which dictate the way group members see themselves in this world. 99% of all the Black people in America are descendants of slaves who were born in America. Their only connections to Africa are the oral stories told to them by their parents and grandparents, which faded with each generation. They have no personal connection to Africa, and not one country on the African continent ever sent a single vessel to this country to rescue any of the millions of Blacks who were contained, kidnapped, enslaved, killed, and psychologically crippled. Enslaved Blacks in America were decultured and forced to devise their own survival skills and attitudes. These enslaved persons and their offspring were stripped of everything and forced to adapt and survive under the most inhumane conditions for over 360 years. During that period of time, they developed a blended culture and emerged as Black Americans, no longer Africans. Black Americans are totally unlike any other humans on this earth. They are a combination of cultures and uncommon experiences. Therefore, the group is special and exception. Some avoid the term Black because they do not want to identify with the negative and evil historically associated with the word by whites and other groups. Some Blacks shun self-identification by color because it means being less than a full human, stripped of all honor, and subjected to all forms of white rule and power. They have allowed others to frame their thinking of the label or the word Black 1-3. Those who avoid Blackness, in effect, have surrendered their greatest strength and badge of identity. Black Americans are unique. The enslavement process stripped Blacks of their Africanness and forced them to forge together their own unique culture. It is so unique that it is copied, mimicked, and appropriated by non-Blacks all over the world. Many Blacks, non-Blacks, and especially conservatives prefer the term African American. It is a term that removes race from a race-based dilemma and redirects focus to culture. African American is a less specific term than Black, just as substituting terms like minority, people of color, and poor people is less threatening than the term Black. The term African American obfuscates, dilutes, and erases the unique history of Blacks in this country. Black should never be equated to African Americans or other groups within minority classes. Using the term African American is an example of changing Black problems to a minority solution. Since all life began in Africa, in the broadest sense, the label African American can be applied to any human from any place on the earth that migrates to America. Once they establish residence in America, they can legitimately claim to be African American. Black exceptionality is a fundamental key to unlock the doors leading to group self-empowerment, recognition, respect, and appreciation for their contributions to the socio-economic development of this nation, to which they are entitled as special people. They must distinguish themselves by claiming their exceptionality as Black Americans, just as Europeans in the 1682nd distinguished themselves by officially labeling themselves white Americans instead of Pilgrims or Puritans. The label white distinguished them thereafter. Due to the fact that the masses of Blacks in America are totally ignorant of Africa, they identify with the African American label only out of love and respect for the Black people residing on the African continent. In physical and genetic makeup, they are as far from being African Blacks as they are from being European whites. There are enormous differences in the experiences of a Black person born and raised in America versus an African born and raised on the African continent. Native Blacks in America were stripped of their Africanness centuries ago when their ancestors were transported to the Americas. It was at that point that their differences began. Blacks were forced to create and fabricate a culture that blended the various African tribal backgrounds with the American culture they found here. Being enslaved in America was a very different experience than being colonized on the African continent. African Blacks were not stripped of their culture, languages, families, relatives, homeland, communities, religion, and sense of peoplehood. Where, on the other hand, Black Americans were stripped in all respects, reduced to the level of field animals, and treated as disposable property. Consequently, African blacks who visit or migrate to the United States, since they are different from native blacks, and tend to express a degree of superiority over the descendants of slaves. They are different. They came here voluntarily, have homelands and relatives in Africa with whom they identify and communicate, and they have a place to return whenever they so choose. Americans recognize the difference also and accord greater respect to African visitors and dignitaries than to native blacks. In fact, it was not unusual prior to the civil rights movement of the 1960 seconds for some Black Americans to dress in African garb and pretend to be African visitors or dignitaries just to garner greater respect from white Americans. Using unspecific terms like African American obscures the unique history of blacks in America and can have harmful effects similar to what happens when the terms minority, people of color, or poor people are used instead of black. A lawsuit filed by a Pakistani who applied for the African American Banneker Scholarship at the University of Maryland in the 1990 seconds demonstrates the folly of imprecise language. The university denied him a scholarship because recipients had to be African American. The Pakistani student filed a lawsuit charging the university with discrimination. The student's case was based on a very simple but reasonable explanation. The Pakistani student said he had lived in Africa before migrating to the United States and considered himself African. Now that he lives in America, he is an African American. The Maryland Supreme Court agreed and ruled in the student's favor, awarding him $150,000. The message to native blacks is a caution. In circumstances where a race label is necessary, do not permit the use of broad and ambiguous terms to define you. The school did not meet its goal of providing scholarships for the specific purpose of attracting black students. The school's needs were specific, but the term African American was not. It expanded the target group in an imprecise way. Had the school used the term black, the Banneker Scholarship Fund would have had an additional $150,000 to distribute toward worthy black applicants. The distinction between black and African America is important. Blacks came here as Africans, but what they experienced in this county made them different. They were stripped of everything: their culture, language, religion, the right to benefit from their own labor. They were not acknowledged as human and were denied the expression of natural human longings. They could not love, protect, or plan for their families. Blacks endured these experiences. All the while, their labor drove the economic engine that built this nation. Withstanding and surviving these experiences became the badge of courage that distinguishes native blacks from any other group in America. Those experiences signify this country's indebtedness to them. There may be a difference in the terms and historical experiences, but the two groups are genetically linked. It is imperative, therefore, that native black Americans support and recognize Africa, the birthplace of mankind, and strive to protect its people and material resources from further abuse and exploitation by foreign entities.